Rosemary DeJarnette is a senior instructor, reading specialist, and assistant chair of general education and distance learning at Beacon College. The Leesburg, Florida Liberal Arts School is America's first accredited college or university dedicated to educating students with learning disabilities and attention issues. She created the Torch Teaching of Reading and Comprehension holistically labs at the college, which culminated in higher success rates for students concurrently enrolled in college composition and writing across the community. Dr. Joshua D. Fader, MD, is a board-certified general psychiatrist and child and adolescent psychiatrist, and is a distinguished fellow of both the American Psychiatric Association and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. He is executive medical director for Positive Development and editor-in-chief at the Carlat Child Psychiatry Report. He's a clinical associate professor at the University of California San Diego School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry, where he teaches about learning disorders including dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. Dr. Tricia A. Zucker is an education researcher and former teacher. She is a professor of pediatrics and co-director of the Children's Learning Institute at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. Her research interests include early identification and prevention of reading disabilities, evidence-based curriculum and instruction, and aligned family and school-based interventions. She has authored over 60 scholarly publications and earned the Presidential Early Career Award for scientists and engineers. We're going to start a conversation with Rosemary. Rosemary, can you share with us some of the more common language-based learning disabilities?
Absolutely. So one of the most common disabilities that we see is dyslexia in the classroom. And students who have dyslexia have trouble with reading comprehension, decoding sounds within words, even their oral language and writing. Another one that's very common in our schools is to see dysgraphia, which, similar to the dyslexia with reading, it impacts our writing. So being able to size and space your letters, maybe students will use the wrong word when they're constructing sentences or misspell a word. We see dyscalculia with math facts and numerical information. It could be with time, when we're learning first how to tell time. And last, we see auditory processing disorders, which is when students will have difficulty filtering different sounds and the order of sounds, as well as taking in information that is given verbally. And one thing we want to keep in common is with all of these, we sometimes see that comorbidity of ADHD.
Thank you, Rose. Well, let's go to Dr. Fader. So you have a child who's grappling with a lot of these issues that Rosemary discussed. How does this impact their self-esteem and confidence?
Thanks for that question. So you need to think about both psychological and social factors here. Psychologically, when you've got these learning difficulties, a kid can be sad or even depressed and certainly anxious. And of course, this idea of feeling you can do things isn't there. So it really they take a hit to their feelings of competence because they feel like they can't do things. And then socially, kids tend to avoid that topic or maybe multiple topics if they have multiple learning difficulties. And their peers may be teasing them. This is often an age where kids are kind of figuring out their hierarchies, who's better at running, who's better at math. And if you're not good at something, well, maybe kids are picking on you for it. And then finally, sometimes we push kids too early. They're not ready for something like algebra in 5th grade, and that only leads to unnecessary failure.
All right, thank you, Doctor. So Dr. Zucker, parents are going to want to get ahead of the game here. Can you share with us some red flags they should be looking for that are kind of early warning signs for language-based learning disabilities?
We recommend that parents and teachers be aware of developmental milestones checklist. These are really helpful in the early stages of development to just have a sense of what's typical at different ages and to understand that there is a wide range of normal development. So for example, in the area of language development, milestone checklist would help you understand if your child is talking later than expected or has a more limited vocabulary than expected, or perhaps if they are not interested in social communication and keeping conversations going. Also, this would help you to look for red flags like difficulty learning to read or with early math. So the earlier we can identify learning difficulties, the earlier we can start intervention and get kids set up for success.
All right, thank you. So Rosemary, can you share with us some specific strategies that parents can use to help support children with language-based learning disabilities?
So yes, so for parents, I would recommend them to just normalize that support is it's just part of their daily routine. As you heard previously, one of the things that students struggle with is that they feel different in the classroom, and that can impact them socially as well as academically. And so just really as a parent, normalizing that support is part of learning. It'll increase that child's motivation. It'll also improve their self-efficacy. Another thing is to make sure that you work as a team with your child's teacher. Your child's going to kind of model off of you. So if they see you working together with that teacher and having that positive attitude, that's also going to impact their learning environment. As a parent, I would also recommend surrounding and encouraging your child to read all kinds of books, audiobooks, comic books, anything that brings them a little bit of fun, I would strongly encourage.
Great. Dr. Fader, I wanted to drill down a little bit on the question I previously asked Dr. Zucker. Can you tell us what are some of the challenges and opportunities when it comes to early intervention for parents who are trying to support their children with language-based learning disabilities?
Oh, absolutely. I'm really glad that you asked that. I mean, I think the biggest problem is when people don't recognize the signs of these problems. Tricia was talking about milestones, and I want to get back to that in a second. But the big one is the avoidance that I spoke about a little bit earlier. Kids might be avoiding, and then parents may be, or teachers may be blaming the student for being bad or calling them a difficult child, oppositional. And it's really because they're having trouble with that academic or cognitive process, right? The other thing is when kids end up competing without learning to cooperate, that can be another big challenge, just in the way the system might be set up for learning. But the opportunities are really great. I mean, if we can help kids to learn to work together using everyone's unique perspective, that's an amazing win. Everybody's so different. We see the world differently, and learning differences make it much more clear that we do that we learn in different ways. So it's an amazing way to help people work together and learn to work together. And on top of that, building meaningful relationships between students and teachers and peers and even parents. I wanted to get back just briefly to the milestone thing because the CDC put out some new milestones for walking and talking for little kids, and we really want to pick these things up early. And the problem with the new milestones is that they allow a little bit later before you start doing early intervention. And many of us in my field are a little bit concerned that we may wait a little too long. So it's a tension in our field about, well, what's the right milestone versus do you need to jump in there sooner so that you can help kids sooner?
Definitely sounds like some valid concerns, Dr. Fader. Dr. Zucker, we've been focusing a lot on parents, and a lot of the time that students spend is in school, of course. So I'm wondering, how can teachers differentiate instruction for students who are dealing with language-based learning disabilities?
So let's think first about a situation where you're concerned, but a child does not have a diagnosis. The first thing that teachers can do in these situations is use great practices to differentiate instruction to meet all learners where they're at. So some examples of this are what we call scaffolding strategies. These are ways to take a task and maybe step it down, make it a little easier so that a child can still have success in the classroom. For example, you can take a big open-ended question for a child, and if they're having difficulty answering that, reframe it as a more simple, closed, either-or type of question. This lets you keep conversations going with kids who have limited language and they feel successful in the classroom. For kids who have diagnosed learning difficulties, you'll want to work with parents each year to make sure you have a plan in place to set them up for success. This will usually include some accommodations and also supports to make sure that they're getting a lot of positive feedback from you. And finally, going back to what Josh said, it's so important to just create a classroom environment where we really accept kids who are neurodivergent and we celebrate those differences, because in many ways, these are just different ways of seeing the world.
All right, thank you. So Rosemary, you're working in a college setting, and so clearly students are still dealing with these issues once they are walking on campus there. Is it too late to remediate language-based learning disabilities at that point?
Absolutely not. So I work with students every single day who have been told that they will not read at college level or they cannot write at college level. And with explicit skill development, they are able to achieve all of those things and reach their goals, become active members of our community, pursue the careers that they dream of doing. And some of the ways that we do that is we build in multimodal learning. So a student isn't just hearing information in one way. Instead, there might be a visual component as well as a tactile component. They're having discussions with their peers. So building in multiple ways of hearing information ensures that those students who do need that differentiated instruction are receiving it. We also want to keep in mind that assistive technology that we're using at all levels of education, even in our careers, speech to text. We might also use something like audio that'll read to us, graphic organizers to help break down information. So all of those pieces, they don't only just work in our elementary, middle, and high schools, they're also very effective in college and beyond.
All right. Dr. Fader, so as a parent who's trying to support their child at home, do the strategies change at each developmental stage for these parents, or is it just building on each building block as we go along?
Yeah. Well, there are some things that stay the same and some things that change, of course, right? But I think the main buzz phrase, if you want it, and I don't know who made this up, is be curious, not furious. So again, not being angry at your kid when they're having difficulty. Kids usually really want to do well and want to please you. And if they're not, it's probably because they're frustrated. And like Rosemary was saying, we have to figure out how to make learning meaningful to people and maybe even fun. Mathematicians don't do worksheets when they're inventing things, right? They're taking real life problems. So if you're reading to each other, measuring ingredients for cookies, writing your names in the dirt, things like that. But it does change developmentally. And kind of getting back to, Rosemary's working at the college level. And I talked earlier about finding the signs. Well, those signs of possible learning difficulties are different at different ages. And so when I teach the child psychiatry fellows at UCSD, I've got pages and pages of signs at preschool and regular school and, like elementary school and high school. And then even at the college level, things you can be looking for, because people sometimes do okay for a while. And then when things get more difficult, they hit a wall. And then they do need some of these kinds of things that Rosemary's describing. But I would say the other theme that really comes through for me is this principle of observing your child, waiting and observing, and not just jumping in, and then joining them in the things that they really like to do, and then building on those things that they like to do and putting in the kinds of concepts and things that they're supposed to be learning, whether it's, now you're learning prepositions. If you're a little kid, you're looking for your little bunny that you love under something or over something, or maybe at the high school level, you're writing about something you really care about because you're very, because you're a high school kid and you really feel really strong feelings about social issues and things like that. So it really does change developmentally, but that wait, join, build ethos should go all the way through.
All right. So Dr. Zucker, one of the biggest challenges, I imagine, is carrying on what may be happening in the home as far as supporting your child into the school setting. How can parents best advocate for their children to make sure they're getting all the support they need to help them be successful with their language-based learning disabilities?
It's a wonderful question. And one of the things that I think helps parents feel empowered and ready to do this is to remember you were your child's first and you are still their most important teacher, because you're the only teacher who's alongside them for their entire learning career. So as a parent, this means that you want to articulate your child's strengths as they enter each new school year. And just like Josh was saying, parents know that teachers are curious. They would love to more quickly get to know your student. And so some of what you can do is you can explain to your teacher, here's what motivates my kid. Here's what helps at home. Those sorts of things are so important. And we coached about 1,000 early childhood teachers around the state of Texas each year. And one of the things that we do is we give both parents and teachers really simple goal setting forms for their parent teacher conferences. This way, everyone can come prepared to talk about the child's strengths and areas for growth. And then they can set goals to work together across school and home in ways that will be aligned and support the child's learning. And also keep in mind that parent teacher conferences or IEP review meetings, these things usually only happen 1 or 2 times a year. So it's really important to set up a way for you and your child's teacher to communicate routinely. That back and forth two-way communication is so critical for children with learning differences.
Okay. So Rosemary, I'm wondering if you can offer any advice to both parents and educators who may be feeling overwhelmed with all the things that come with supporting a student with language-based learning disabilities.
Sure. So one of the things is when I think about parents and educators, what one piece of advice would I give to both sets? I think it's important to understand that every child's journey is unique, no matter what age they are. There's no one accommodation. There's no one strategy that's going to work for every student who might have dyslexia or dysgraphia. If it was that easy, it'd be magic. So it's really important to think about your child or that student individually and work on figuring out what they need. Another piece for teachers and educators, I would really recommend collaborating. Find other teachers in your building who might have worked with a student in the past who's had one of these learning-based disabilities, and talk with them, see what they've used that might have worked. Collaborate with families. Just as we heard, that relationship is really important because every piece of information you get is going to be useful in the classroom. And I think it's also important to remember, while we may become frustrated or overwhelmed, these things have nothing to do with the child's intelligence. Actually, these students normally are above average intelligence. They just need instruction in a specific, scaffolded, modeled way to help them achieve their goals.
Thank you, Rose. So, Dr. Fader, I'm wondering, are there any therapeutic interventions that can be beneficial for students who are dealing with language-based learning disabilities?
Oh, absolutely. And first, I want to thank you for getting the 4 of us together. You've picked a couple colleagues who I never met before, and I feel like we're very much on the same page. And I'd love to do a case conference with these guys sometime. So it's just really, really wonderful to meet people for the first time who have very similar thinking. And I have to say, I defer to both of them as more expert in, how to actually do these things, because I teach what you might want to do and then follow up. But I'm not the guy who's actually doing some of these things with students. But for dyslexia, and they, I hope, would agree, learning the rules of language rather than doing a lot of memorizing seems to be helpful. And lots of games with rhyming and rhythm, things you can do at home, can be helpful. I call that therapeutic because it's really working those parts of the brain that will help you feel good about those things and more confident when you're actually doing them in school with related kinds of tasks. For dysgraphia, with writing programs, there are so many writing programs out there, and there's different research on whether they're effective or not. And so you might want to be a choosy consumer and try to make sure it's something that has some research, or at least research support. My favorite is the kind that get you up and out of your chair and using your whole body rather than just hunching over papers trying to do something, which some of them do. And developmentally, that's a big thing, because if you think about it, if you think about little kids, they do this. It looks like a letter I or a 1 before they do triangles by many years. So think about this. If you're trying to teach a kid in order. A is like a triangle. Before I down the line, you may be frustrating someone. So think about it developmentally. And finally, with math, with dyscalculia, I think hands-on experiences, kind of like I mentioned before, using building like with construction toys or figuring out how to cut up a pizza so it's fair. Those are things that can help you get number sense really in you because it's meaningful to you.
So Dr. Zucker, let's think a little more globally here. How can schools develop more inclusive and supportive environments for students with language-based learning disabilities?
It's a great question. And typical classrooms can incorporate strategies that are inclusive, not just of children with language-based learning disabilities, but just general practices that everyone will benefit from. So we've already talked about a few of these, but I'm going to just reiterate them again. Physically active environments, giving kids brain breaks is a wonderful way to engage all learners. Using hands-on activities is also an effective strategy for all learners, but especially important for kids with language-based learning disabilities. Another shortcut that all classrooms can use is strategies for English learners or emergent bilinguals. This is sometimes referred to as sheltered instruction, and it incorporates not only those types of physically active learning, but also lots of visual aids and additional just review of concepts so that we build knowledge over time. And finally, the most important thing that you can do to support children with language-based learning difficulties is keep conversations going. Extended classroom conversations really add up over time to build the skills and the brain networks we need to support learning in all of these language regions of the brain. So we like to think of this as keeping a conversation going for at least 5 turns. We often coach teachers to strive for at least 5 turns so that if you ask a question and you get a response from kids, a regular conversation would just stop right there, but we want to keep it going a few more turns. So we then ask a follow-up question, give the child another opportunity to respond, and then close out by repeating or recasting what the child said. Those sorts of things allow the teacher to scaffold not only for that child with a language-based learning disability, but really the whole class benefits from those sorts of inclusive strategies where you keep conversations going.
All right, well, thank you. That's going to have to be our final word on this conversation. Rosemary DeJarnette, Dr. Joshua Fader, and Dr. Tricia Zucker. Thanks for the knowledge.